I want to welcome everybody here today. I'm really personally excited to see everybody and really glad that we have this opportunity to sort of collaborate together. I want to start this morning with a little story. So I started my career in higher ed 25 years ago. I started at the University of California at UCSF. I worked there for 10 years as a budget analyst, and it's so good to see some of my friends here from there. I went east with my husband for 13 years. I worked at a little private institution out there. The farm team, yes. And I was so pleased when I started talking to Erin about coming out back to Cal, back to the University of California system, which I am a huge fan of public education. And I want to also say that I am also a parent of a couple of kids who are in college. And I'm also the wife of someone who recently, for the second time, lost their job in this very tight economy. And we have, over the course of these years, spent down a lot of our accumulated savings. Last week, I got a bill from 2 institutions for $120,000. We have access to financial aid. We're fortunate. But I also think that seeing that as a parent, as a state, as a taxpayer, I am inspired every day to keep the students of our great institution in my mind and my heart as we start to try to work on reform. I think that there is a lot of room for us to debate the pace of change, the types of approaches that we take. But I think the one thing that is not debatable is the fact that we need to change. And I hope that today we are able to start having really rich debates about how to improve this situation that we find ourselves in. So we're here today. Can I have the next slide? More? One more? Part of my role in working in higher ed business systems over the last 15 years, I have been fortunate enough to collaborate with a group of folks called the Oracle Higher Ed Users Group. And it is a nationwide collaboration of higher ed institutions. We have an annual conference, and I was the chair last year of the Budget and Planning Product Advisory Group. We talk to Oracle about the needs of our industry, and we also support other people who are using these products in our industry. So in that vein, I have also done a lot of presentations. Some of the slides that are here are from those presentations. And I've had a lot of interest and requests for people to have more of a deep dive in what we're doing here at Berkeley. And so I agreed as one of my deliverables for this year to put on this conference. And it is being recorded so that we can share all of this information and the work that we've done with our colleagues in 700 or 800 different institutions across not just the country, but the world. So I thank you for being here as part of the audience today to get this message out. We also had requests from other UC campuses who were perhaps interested in the different methods that we've been using to get where we've gotten so far. And so, again, that spurred our day. What to expect? We are not coming here with a defined plan of what you do. We are here, this is not a cookbook today. We're here sharing our test kitchen. We agree that doing nothing is not an option. Doing something is our only option. And so we are doing something. We are not saying it's the best something. We're saying this is the best we have and the work that we have done with our best resources to move forward. So we're here not only to share what we've learned, give you some advice that we could offer based on our experiences. This is my second implementation. My first one was at that little institution on the other coast. But we also want to learn from everyone in this room. You guys are the source of fantastic ideas. The people in the higher ed user group, these 700 or 800 other institutions, are the source of phenomenal ideas, and many of them you'll see in some of these techniques and tools that we've built. We want this to be an opportunity for people to ask questions and to learn more. I also want us to be sensitive to the fact that we're recording this for other people, and so it will be helpful if you have questions, that if there are opportunities for us to use the built-in time that we've developed for our lunch period, for example, is an hour and a half. We have breaks, and we're all looking forward to seeing everybody at Free House, which is after this, where we can sort of have a more informal conversation. So to the extent that we can offer clarifying questions or really get more clear on some of the things that we're presenting, we would ask you to go back into the room. We have a microphone set up, and we want to make sure that you share your questions so that the people back at their individual institutions who are listening to us online will have the benefit of your question. So with that, can I have the next slide? Sorry. I want to introduce the woman that brought me to Berkeley. She inspired me in a way that I've never been inspired before to come out here and to take on this work. And she has been a huge champion of this effort. Sometimes it's gotten pretty hard, and I know we're all experiencing this. This kind of transformational change isn't easy. We all know that. And one of the blessings that this project had, and that this initiative as a whole has, is the championship of our chancellor, our provost, the office, the Operational Excellence Office, and Working Smarter initiatives at the Office of the President. It gets tough, and we are blessed to be able to have a test kitchen and to have patience while we go through this. So with no further ado, Erin Gore.
Good morning. I actually could not be more excited to be here today. And the other individual who will be helping a bit with our intro and then will also be helping with some of the later presentations is Laurent Heller, who is our budget director or budget superhero. So I'll say that I got drafted to Cal about 4 years ago. Actually, my 4-year anniversary will be July 1st. And I kept asking in the interview, where's the budget? Do you have a document? How do you plan? What's going on? And man, everyone was really good with evasive answers in the interview process. And I had been here about 30 days, and I marched into the chancellor's office, because I'm a little like that, and I said, so there's not one. There's not like a system that has the budget, and then we're tracking actuals and variance, and a communications document? And he goes, that would be lovely. Let's do that. And I was like, oh, okay. So we talk a lot about what was the burning platform to do this now. And there's a lot of talk about the changing model of higher ed and the interaction with the state. But to take it back to Cathy's story, the thing that really motivates me is we all know that higher ed has been on this cost trajectory that's not sustainable. And people are really personally feeling it. And you can listen to NPR or read the national news, and people are really angry. And when you think about someone having this rich opportunity of higher ed wherever they are, but then they leave with, let's say, $120,000 worth of debt. I will note for UC, the average debt level is only $25,000 when you leave, and at Berkeley, it's about $15,000. But in the nation and in general, this is this wonderful gift that you have to then translate into this really long-term decision. And so how can we all help to make that better? And so while the burning platform and the state is one of it, I really think the big motivating factor is how do we make sure we're leveraging each dollar effectively? How can we tell the story about how we're doing that? And how can we tie that into a very changing landscape where students can demand things differently and their expectations are different, right? If you're in first grade now, your whole life has had iPads. And so it's really different than the world that fund accounting was created in, which the last really definitive book was written in 1980. And you think about that, we did not have desktop computers, and we didn't have big ERP systems, and the tools that we're going to talk about today, you know, no one could even imagine, because they were dropping off the ledgers with the green and white lines, right? And really small level of detail was important, because that's all you could really get off of that page. So the world has changed. The expectations of our communities are way up, right? Our faculty, they get to use really cool toys in everything they do. All of their online banking works really well. They're like, why can't you give me this? And you're like, well, we have 22,000 funds, half of which your name is attached to. We can't give you that, right? So it was in that context that when I came here, I was really fortunate to be charged with the mandate of how do we think about this different? And so I said, well, how do things work here, right? And so first I was given a 150-page PowerPoint from 2 predecessors before me. And I am sure that if I could have gotten through it in 5 or 6 sittings, I would have really understood. But we asked the team, okay, capsulate it down to 1 slide. Wait, wrong slide. Oh no. Total fail. Slide 5. Okay, I'm not touching this one anymore. There we go. Next slide. So they capsulated it down into this slide, which we call the spaghetti slide. And while this seems like we would only be doing this as a joke, if you think about
My favorite title for this slide in a previous iteration had been, "What, you don't know how this works?"
And so each one of these lines, and one of the reasons that Laurent got wooed into his position was he had a sheet of 89 things that the center did to a unit that made it impossible to know how much money he had. And like all of those 89 things are like 3 of these, right? And then it just grew from there. But it was all of this accumulation of individual decisions and not taking that step back and saying, okay, what makes sense? How do we talk about it? And then when you feel some of the classic academic debates, which is like, why is it so hard to talk about what something costs? We all have this. It's like the garage that things have built up. And it's really hard to take a step back. But if we keep simplifying to the meta question of the impact, the dollars, the students, the faculty, it helps to put some clarification here. But we also wanted to figure out, within all of this, we have a large and distributed finance staff. What are they spending their time doing? Because you want to know that too before you do a big change. Lauren, the next slide.
Yeah, so creating that spaghetti obviously is transactionally complex. This morning, actually, I rolled out of bed and had an email from the provost who was asking me to explain our old indirect cost recovery sharing model. And I was like, okay, so buckle in. The unit gets returned to it 7.5% of modified total direct costs, incremented from a 2005 base, modified downward if total recovery is under 30%, I believe is the number. I might have got that wrong. It's something like that. It's a little bit more complex than that. There's some other add-on pieces and whatnot. So how do we calculate that? How do we transact that? How do the executives know that and know what to plan on getting and how the actions that they will take will influence what they wind up with? You know, the short stories, they don't. You know, they really don't. And that's a problem for us if we're going to really drive costs, understand our resources, and make a difference. So what is it that we are doing? This slide kind of boggled my mind when I got the data I needed to put it together. We looked at our temporary budget ledgers. How many folks in here work with the temporary budget? Mostly a UC crowd, right? Yeah, so
if you don't know what it is, you do not want it, right? This is not a part of a takeaway for you. No,
you might not want to, but we're going to inflict some of it on you.
And good job, Barbara.
So So we do our budgeting in 2 budget ledgers. These are double entry bookkeeping ledgers, permanent budget ledger, temporary budget ledger. And these are manual transactions in Berkeley's temporary budget ledger. There are many more automated system-based ones. But in a recent year, 2011, we had 150,000 manually generated budget journal lines. Oops. And these things are mostly balancing, transacting, moving balances from one spot to another, and this is what our finance and budgeting staff on campus really, spent a significant portion of their time doing. This is nice stuff, but it's really small dollars. This is not actually helping us manage our $2.2, $2.4 billion budget. This is transactional, and really, so budgeting sort of is transactional at Berkeley historically.
And so on this, my favorite illustration of this is I'm at a Council of Deans meeting, and everyone wants to say that they're in support of this $3,000 initiative. So a dean raises his hand with great intentions and says, okay, let's each contribute the exact amount of $3,000 divided by all of us here and do this. And I stand up and I'm like, God, no. I'm like, you can all say you've supported it. We don't need to transact all the little $100 going around to show that. But that was a big change. And then they kept saying, well, when you say who paid for it, you'll say all of us. And I say, yes. So, I mean, that was just part of the culture that in terms of that interaction came from doing some of those budget journals.
Yeah. And so given that our ledgers are complex, our processes are complex, there's all this transactional effort happening in our systems because that's really kind of what they're designed to do. It's from an appropriation culture, not really sort of a revenue management or a strategic budgeting culture, I would say, at least on the ground here at Berkeley. How is it that we do our strategic budgeting and try to manage our units? Well, here we all did it in Excel. We built our own budgets in Excel. We kind of tried to mine the ledgers that were filled with all this complexity for the essential nuggets of information that we needed in order to actually understand what was going on. And if you printed out these different reports that we had back in the day on a unit, you got 150 pages of detail on the law school, say, and let's wade through those 150 pages and find the important stuff and pull it out and throw it on our spreadsheet. But the trick is, if you have to go to the books and pull out the information that you want and the information that's important, do you ever find what you're not looking for? The answer actually is no, you don't necessarily. And this particular budget was developed, by an executive on campus, good, smart person, very engaged financially, fantastic financial support, but our systems really weren't working for them. And, this budget found that the executive had $7.6 million available for them. In reality, when you sum the books and you actually look at it the right way, there was 10 million or more. There for the executive, and they had the wrong information, and they were making decisions based on the wrong information. So I think this just highlights something that we realized early on, and it's been sort of a guiding tenet for us, which is that we really want to plan to the full chart of accounts here at Berkeley. And we want to summarize the full chart of accounts always, never just cherry pick pieces of it. Which part of your books do you want to ignore? The answer is none. You want to pay attention to all of the books.
Before you change slides, I think the other thing that I want to say here, and I know many of you know and have worked with Teresa Constantinidis, and some of you knew Paul Jenny, who's also really active on the national scene, and he's now up at Washington. They put in place a tool that we don't talk about today, but underlines all of this, which is what we call our deficit clearing process here. So we actually have a process and a policy on campus that at the end of each year, we do true up all of the funds, and we've made some modifications to that in terms of trying to streamline it. But what it does is it forces us to deal with, at the end of every fiscal year, any deficits. And so it's not a panacea, but it does sort of isolate that. And I would say that that started about 4 years before we started this-ish. And so I just want to say that that was a key foundational policy which helps facilitate a lot of this, was that we had that fiscal discipline in the books on all the funds before. And so that's something to think about.
Yeah, it's huge.
So as we were going through this, we kept saying, well, the San Francisco Chronicle says we're falling off a cliff. But as we know, we can see in the actuals we have money. And this was part of the big foundational element of the change, that what we had called this subset of funds was going down, but monies that had been thought about in our culture as one time or non-recurring, which was really just a framework, right? We could all poke at individual ones and say, well, that happens every year, so can I plan for it? Or this type of money we don't look at. But if you looked at all of it, we really had a lot of opportunity. And so what we decided to do, and this was both the type of people in this room, but also the provost, the chancellor, the vice chancellors across the board, was how do we have some high-level overarching things that show people that we can redirect resources where they're needed? So one of the most exciting ones we did was we allocated money from our operating budget to financial aid to create the Middle Class Access Program. Woo! And what we thought about was, what is a rule of thumb that the total cost of attendance, not just tuition and fees, should be of a family's income? And all of you see really benefits from the blue and gold, and we all in California benefit from Cal grants. So how do we build on top of that, but try to target funds for families whose incomes are between $80,000 and $140,000? And how do we say that 15% is this amount? And then how do we say that out of our whole operations, we're going to add money to financial aid for this? And so this was a great one. The other big one that got people motivated to say, hey, if we thought differently, we could fund the big important things, was we funded what we called the Common Good Curriculum. So how do you make sure students can get into reading and composition, gateway science, foreign language? How do you make sure that as students come to Cal, the myth that I can't get the classes I want in the first 2 years is just that? And we have more tools coming, which we'll touch on a little later today, which then give the deans and the chairs and the registrars and the individual enrollment managers so they can see each week where are students going and how do we direct funds to make sure they can get classes, right? So these big things really helped galvanize our campus around, okay, this change is hard, but you get to do amazing things. So then, just to wrap up this section, what this change does is, historically, we had always focused on the increment. And I would say that for a whole host of reasons in higher ed, that is what you do. But if you only focus on the increment, you can't do the things like the financial aid. You can't do the things like directing the courses. That 5% for us, sometimes is 100 million. When you look at the whole pie, it's 2.2 billion. And I feel like it's easy for us to say, oh, but that's restricted and we can't do this. But if you think about the possibility of the 2.2 billion in solving your problems, wow, you can do a lot more of those amazing things. So I don't say that lightly, but I say it to be inspirational in terms of some of the things that we've unlocked from this change. And with that, I will turn it over to Cathy.
I'm just going to hold it. I'm good.
Has the magic though, so she might be smart. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so a lot of people, so we've heard a lot about why we felt that we needed to take these steps and what was inspiring us to begin with them. I came to Cal to implement a tool. I know. And I did so feeling like it was going to be this fabulous plug and play because I had just done it at Harvard. Oops, I did. Okay, how do I? Oh, okay. So let's describe the business case. This is actually published in our charter. We wanted to be able to see real financial data in real time. And we've already talked about the spaghetti slide and the tool sets and how complicated that was. How we needed to be nimble, but the tools were preventing that. We needed to think about how the current budget system that we have was developed in a different time, in a different factor, in a different world where the state was contributing a ginormous percentage of our funding. We recognized that our financial model had changed. And as Erin said, we were increasingly relying on more competitive sources of funding, and we needed to make sure that we were taking advantage of the best use of every single dollar that we had. So one of our big thematic elements was this tool would be all funds. And there's different ways of interpreting the level of the funds, but we knew that we could not ignore pots of money or even pots of, even things of change in terms of we're not being able to do incremental anymore. We need to get at that 95% of our spend. So I want to talk for a little bit about the journey that I had as somebody who was in a different situation when we were implementing planning at Harvard than we were here. And there are different ways that you try to think about the implementation, and you might do implementations differently based on where you are. And so I want to take some time to talk about understanding where you are and what you're solving for. So in many cases, certainly in public institutions across the country, there is a focus on expenditure and control. So you're looking at the flows, you're looking at what is the impact on future years of an assumption of permanence in certain funding levels and in certain staffing levels. You have people moving money around between funds, and it's very appropriation-based. It's authorization to spend. It's a different kind of environment than I was in at Harvard, where we were really looking at, and we were already at all funds. We were looking at planning, at multi-year impacts of things. We were looking at very detailed financial formats. The Shrekna was already, we've talked a lot about that, but those kinds of common reporting formats and conversations were throughout the institution. It was all about empowering different divisions. We had, obviously we had local accountability and ownership of their balance sheet at every division. So the conversations were very different in terms of the way the center interacted with the individual divisions. And we were trying to predict annual financials, what was our annual financial statement going to look at? Let's look at variances. Let's think about what we can do now to impact not only this current year, but future years, and constantly looking at things that way. And we looked at the plan and its closeness to what we actually occurred as a measure of accountability. So people were responsible for their results across all of the accounts, across all of the funds. So when you go to implement these systems, I talk about this in terms of evolution versus revolution. So in the situation that I found myself at Harvard, we were in an evolutionary situation. We had a very Excel-based manual process. We had local budget processes that were based on people sending out spreadsheets across their entire division, collecting it back up, and then trying to massage it and fix all the things that people had done wrong, like, oh, I don't have enough money to cover the benefits, so I'm just going to change the benefits rate in my spreadsheet, which has happened. And so the way that I thought about the implementation there was very different than the way that I had to think about the implementation here at Cal. In an evolutionary standpoint, you're moving from a process and you're utilizing a different tool to do it that automates a lot of calculations, that helps you kind of do rule-based things, creates different scenarios that you can compare from, different what-ifs. And the tool that we implemented was meant to do that. It's at a higher level, it's not transactional, and it doesn't necessarily generate journal lines that would create appropriations. We can use it as the basis for them, but it's not what its intended audience is. So business process, everybody had the same process that they went through annually. They had different templates, but in the end, they pushed their budgets up into the GL, and there were different versions of them, not a lot, that they could then use for comparison over the course of the year. And some of them, they were fixed, the ones that had gone to the corporation for approval, and other ones were more like an ongoing forecast, and they would take snapshots, et cetera. So this was a normal way of doing business. What we're dealing with here at Berkeley is an entirely different thing. We have folks out there in the units who aren't familiar with financial accounting concepts, aren't used to the Schreckna format, looking at things and in fund groups across everything, thinking about variances and what they mean and what actions that you take. And in some cases, we have people who don't even know how to use Excel. So if we look at the big key things that go into one of these projects, your user engagement is very different if you're in an evolution versus a revolution. In the case of Harvard, we had people identified in each unit that were in complete control of what the process was. They owned their users. They were active and directive in terms of their requirements, and they were able to implement the changes and take ownership for them. They were perfectly, well, not perfectly, there were pockets of imperfection. On the project team was focused on the implementation, the system aspects of it, gathering up everybody's templates. We look at them, we compare, we find commonalities, we develop a prototype based on everybody's needs, and we present it to them, and people look at it and go, yeah, tweak this, tweak that, we're moving on. In the case of phasing in these different types of implementations, when we delivered our pilot to the first 4 units, it captured literally 80 to 90% of requirements. Our conference room pilot was at something around the lines of 50%. The change management piece was, you used to do it in Excel, now you do it here. People understood the basic components of what we were doing. At Cal, that was not the case. And so we had to take different approaches to things, which you'll hear about in this day. We needed a very large extended support team. We needed, to be engaged in kind of executive learning, talking to the deans, talking to the faculty, the students even. I mean, I was shocked when I got here and had a microphone shoved in my face at the first OE meeting about what would you say to people, who say that you shouldn't be doing this project. And I was like, a wrong question? The phasing and timeline, because this is such a huge change, we really needed to do more of a big bang with some variations. Not exactly big bang, but we really wanted to have everybody come at this at the same time so that they were there to support each other, and we could do it in a way that really got them along the path together so that they could support each other. The biggest impact was to the finance workforce. Many people, this was a big fear, a lot of fear in the organism of our staff. Not only new tools, but a new mindset, a new way of thinking, and that required more coaching, et cetera. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, so I get here, and I think, well, I'm just going to implement this tool. And here we are on the short bus, the team and I. This slide illustrates for me the importance of where your organization is and examining where it is and being thoughtful about what else is going on in the atmosphere that is going to mean that you're going to have to crab walk to your Tahitian vacation as far as the implementation. A lot of what I will talk about today is in reaction to a lot of the things that are on the little cars that we're trying to dash between to get there. So this is a look at the implementation plan. So what you'll notice is, and this is sort of humbling, we, in the great hubris that I brought from the institution I had been in, and well, this is going to be so easy, we went ahead, we know, and not just from my 2 implementations, that a proof of concept is very critical to any implementation. People have a lot of ideas based on their experience with ERP systems, perhaps with their reporting systems, perhaps with even smaller Access database, Excel, et cetera, that they have in their head when they think about a budgeting system or a planning system, which this is. So you really want to make sure that you get out some of the high-level things so that people can look and see how it is to have something like this, to demystify some of the things that people might think, that it's a front-end journal posting thing, for example, which was something that we struggled with a little bit. So when I was creating this, I thought, well, okay, so we want to go live with a smaller group of users who are very engaged with us in kind of hammering out some of these sorts of hidden things, like the fact that the budgets and the actuals had different signage, things like that we might not see coming. We had phase 2. We assumed we would go live in December, and that we would have 300 users. And it would be at a summary level. We would then introduce position budgeting, position compensation planning at the employee level in our 3rd phase. First of all, I just want to say that December go-lives are not a good idea. Categorically, it's very hard to get people's attentions in those weeks before December, and they're just not really excited about talking to you about your new system. So I would just say that categorically. When you look at this, you really see this evolution and this sort of moving forward and getting more and more people into not only the tool, but into the new reporting formats, into the business process, into the new mindset. So let's talk about the first thing that we encountered. During our proof of concept time, we identified that our chart of accounts was not optimized for what we were trying to do, and that what we were about to do was a major business process change. Phase 1, we decided, oh, well, this should be easy. We're just going to convert the data into this new format, and we'll let people start to work with some of the tools. SmartView is an Excel-based ad hoc query tool that is extremely powerful, and it tends to be a gateway drug for getting people excited about this other piece of the tool. In that case, we identified that we had major data conversion challenges, and that, in fact, we didn't really have in the budget anything that we could use for creating the plan. We had to go back to actuals and come up with an algorithm that would tell us kind of what we thought a budget would be across all funds. The next piece, and we'll talk about this a lot, is this concept of transfers and how money could be allocated out to people if it wasn't done in a separate budget ledger. And so we collaborated with a number of other institutions about how to do how to highlight in actuals the monetary movements in a way that was broader than moving the budgets around in tiny incremental ways. With phase 2, expansion, so under the summary phase, we really focused on both the data conversion from no budget to a budget based on a forecast, based on actuals. We asked folks to go in and true up their numbers at the division level. They were not asked to go down and try to figure out on a department basis what their revenues and expenses and their fund balances look like. So then the next piece was this time here in the expansion, which was sort of in the fall time frame, where people came in and built out what they had already done for the 12-13 year at a lower level. We onboarded a number of new reporting users, but we still kept the number of people in the tool low because of this change management kind of issue. So then we most recently created the employee position level budgeting. And, I know. And I will say that the biggest learning there is data, which we'll talk about. And getting the data in is a huge challenge, which we learned. This was the place where actually this last year we got at the forecast, people sort of trued up at the department level. So they would say, okay, well now we've got a budget that we think is reasonable across these fund buckets for this year. And then when we pulled in the employee position stuff, they just trued that up. We also introduced a concept of report books that allowed people to not necessarily have to log into the tool, but allow the divisions to produce these reports in the new format that they can then scribble on and make changes to as they were developing this with their teams. So this is my favorite slide. So here's what I thought I was brought here to do. We get the planning chart of accounts, we're going to map the data, we're going to put in the tool, we're going to get users on, we're going to go through this waterfall methodology that we go through, we're implementing systems. And what came clear very, very quickly is that this was not just a tool implementation. We had major things that we needed to deal with. We had a future state business process that we were wanting to get to where there were trade-offs at different levels of the development of the budget, and people were actually talking about the numbers. So we had also a significant amount of infrastructure work to do. Our chart of accounts was the number one thing, and Laurent already touched on why that's so important, be able to see it at all these levels and have it have meaning. And then we had workforce readiness, which is huge. So this is how it's we've thought about it in these years. We'll talk about at the end of this presentation that we are by no means done and that we have a plan out for the next 3 years to continue to evolve this. A lot of people have asked me about the team and how we composed the team. And if I showed you my Harvard team, it would look different than this. We had business oversight, we have technical oversight, we have a project management team, we have a functional team, we have a technical team, and in the middle here you see our consulting partners. A lot of these folks are contract. We tried to minimize consultants. I believe that the greatest thing that you can do with consultants, and I believe in using them a great deal, is to partner them with people in your institution and help grow their skills so that when the consultants or the other contractors move on, you have a really rich, robust team that can carry this forward. So another factor that I think is incredibly important to the success of these tools, and it tends to, or the success of any large change initiative, is your governance and making sure that you are being representative of your stakeholders while making sure that the people who are on these groups share your vision, share your curiosity, share your tolerance for experimentation and stumbling and the kinds of things that happen when you're in your test kitchen burning the bechamel sauce. So let's start at the top. You have we actually combined two groups, one the position management piece and the planning implementation. And position management, because it's so embedded in the success of the employee compensation pieces of it, it was really good and important to have it co-sponsored by the Chief HR Officer, Janine Raymond, and by Erin. These folks are at the 10,000-foot level, and they are guiding the approach, and they are working with the other key executive stakeholders across the institution to help navigate through some of this stuff. They also make decisions on any change to the project scope, timeline, or the resources, the cost. This was honestly my favorite piece of this project, the Local Implementation Manager Steering Committee. We had one local implementation manager for each division, and they were the ones who were representing what their divisional requirements were, and more importantly, what the impact was on the folks in their division. And they were really exciting to be around as we partnered and collaborated on the solution that we were building. I know Laurent has said this many times, but actually getting people in a room and having their really great ideas and opening up the marketplace of ideas and offering different alternatives is the most exciting way to deliver innovation, but it also makes sure that everybody's at your side when you deliver whatever it is you're doing, and they're supportive of it, and it's coming from within. So, we can talk at our breakout sessions about how to build this and how to authentically engage with the folks in the different units to be successful. The compensation design focus group is really about people who are at an even perhaps lower level who are good subject matter experts in a particular area. So when we went to design what we were going to do for planning and budgeting at that employee position level, we wanted the smartest people from campus in that conversation. So we cherry-picked people that had shown us that they were both interested and able to be thoughtful about this and come up with some creative ideas. We also had other ad hoc subject matter expert groups. So when we needed to, we pulled people together and we helped with guiding their interest and passion about some aspect of this into the design of things like reporting. We wanted to make sure that we had captured the kinds of things that would make this tool very valuable from a reporting perspective. We also had the transfers working group. These were the smart people from both the budget office and the units and our controller's office and others who were really kind of working through all the impacts of going to this new model for moving money around and supporting different things. We continue with this work. This is not over. We are continuing to work on the temp and perm budget paradigm and moving that. We also had a very collaborative group that worked with us on the academic position management side. It's a very complex thing to think about in terms of, provisions and things like that are out there in our atmosphere and thinking creatively, both with the academic folks in the leadership levels to try to, and the provost, et cetera, to think through that. The D, or for decision, always lies with the chair of this organization, and in most cases, the membership are contributing to the decision and guiding and advising the decision makers. So in a very real way, Erin and Janine were the final decision makers on all of this stuff, which is so important in a place where debate is sort of like a blood sport sometimes. So let's talk a little bit about what this means for the divisional engagement. I get a lot of questions on that. There are 4 main areas that you're looking for these folks as change agents, because this is very much what they are. You want them to be the communicators of this to their individual division. There is plenty of science to suggest that people hear a message from a trusted person much more effectively than they do from, an email from on high. You want it as low down in the organization as you can get to be successful. We wanted to make sure that they had accountability and ownership for the implementation in their unit. We also wanted to make sure that they were keeping up to date on the project management aspects of it. What is the work that you need to do prior to this next stage? So we need you to identify all your users. We need a single point of contact for that. We need you to go through this data cleanup that's related to position. We need somebody owning that and accountable for it at the local level. We need them to help us with their local business process and what the impact is of some of the designs that are coming out and the expectations. They, more than anyone, are the ones that are going to help us with the chart of accounts realignment, and it's important for them to understand what that is. And we want them participating in the business process design. There is nobody on earth, myself included, who wants somebody from on high to come in and tell me, not knowing my exact circumstances, what a business process has to be. You want that to be a two-way street, and you're negotiating and learning and exploring what works best. And then training. So when we were developing training materials, we really wanted people to be accountable for what that training was going to look like in their unit. And we can talk at some of our breakout sessions about how we were able to leverage that and what kind of tool sets we developed for people to be successful. And this support for the project team, this support for the engagement. As a change agent, you really want people feeling confident that what you're delivering is right. Now let me just say something here. This was not a perfect process. We are still in a change situation such as this. There's an almost 2 steps forward, 2 steps back kind of, I'm getting this, I'm owning this, and then there's also this passivity, if you will, or feeling of like, I don't know enough about what you're talking about to be an effective voice with my constituents. And I want you to come in and stand beside me or deliver the message for me. And so there's this ongoing supportive engagement that happens between the project team and the folks in the budget office and others that helps, and John will talk about outreach, that helps people get past that and feel more comfortable. And there was training and support that we worked with folks on that to help them be more successful. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about position management. I think one of the things that we have found in trying to work through both the position management implementation in our HR system and the managing and planning for positions and employee incumbents is that for the first time in some cases, the HR folks and the finance folks had to find a common language for talking about jobs, people, costing, the way that we choose to configure our job, the number of appointments that people have, how we have organized things in the past, and the way that our current payroll system works within the framework of the fact that we're going to a new system at UC Path, which is our system-wide implementation. This is just a really quick, this is a very siloed understanding of this. But in fact, it's not siloed. It is an organism. It's a management organism, this HR data and the financial data. And if you try to separate them, you get into trouble. So the way we thought about it for the purpose of our implementation is that the finance office is approving the fact that we're going to create a new position and what its funding is. They're going to create the chart strings, and they're going to think about where these costs lie. They're going to advise the way that the position and employee data is constructed as far as how it looks from the financial perspective. On the position management side on HR, they're updating the data in HCM. They're managing internal data processes and approvals around the conditions of employment. What is the right classification for this role? What is the title code that's associated with it? And they're going to approve any kinds of non-financial data. I would say that this is a complete oversimplification of what this actually looks like. And so that is why it is so complicated to try to navigate through this aspect of our budgeting. We all know this. But getting these two groups at the table and understanding the HR components and how they influence costs, something like, there are a lot of things in HR like turnover, like the aging workforce, other kinds of data in HR, which we need to think about in terms of finance, because they have financial implications in the end run. It's not just about where are people costed for the next year or 2 years or 5 years. It's how are we overall controlling our costs and using our HR information to do that. So why did we need position? We wanted a source for the unique combination of the position and the incumbent employee, because we wanted to be able to see when an incumbent employee wasn't there, what the budgetary impact would be. And you want to be able to see, well, if we hold this vacant for this period of time, this is the financial benefit or the drawback related to the program, one way of thinking about it. So when you implement position in your HR system, you get two good things. You get, obviously, the position and position funding, but you also get a template for hiring. And so when you go to hire somebody into that job, it already has the title code. It already has all of these other aspects that you would otherwise have to data enter. So when we started to talk to the HR folks about why position, they were thrilled, because it meant reduced costs for them on the data entry side. We share these benefits together, this bridge about how we talk about salary actions, the human costs of providing our programs, et cetera. We knew that by implementing position, we would have a great opportunity to prepare ourselves for the UC Path implementation, because the UC Path will have position. And we were able to think about how we influence organizational planning, how we influence recruitment, budgeting, all of these kinds of things, and pulled that into the lexicon and the analysis that we provide when we're trying to make management decisions. So these are the kinds of questions that we want to be looking at and thinking about when we consider position or the salary compensation costs. It's a huge percent of our spend, and changes in that and cost growth, et cetera. If we're going to save money, this is where you have to do it, right? So looking at this from a management perspective, you think about how are new positions and position eliminations impacting our long-range planning at the department level, the division level, at the campus level. How many positions are left vacant for years, and how do we think about that? Is this something that is an opportunity for elimination? How do we think about that in our management piece? How is position going up? How many FTE do we have compared to the student curriculum, to the delivery of other types of programs, other metrics, and age demographics? This isn't something that necessarily we think about as a budgeting concern, but if we think about the aging of a particular population in our compensation pool, what do we think the impact is going to be based on this is their current salary range and what it's going to cost us if we have a gigantic dip in, say, our faculty population, and we're going to have these recruitment costs suddenly, these startup packages. How do we model that out? How do we model that risk? So these are the kinds of things that one can have with position data. This, and I.
Erin's favorite slide. So I will give one thing. When you look at this slide, and I got here, and people kept talking about that there were these jobs in the freezer, right? And I was like, well, what does that mean exactly, right? We've got jobs in the freezer. Or we have people that have been hollowed out to think about that. Now imagine talking to a person on the street about your budget and explaining the bodies in the freezer and the hollowed out to talk about your money. This fixes that.
Yes, the hollowed out positions, on hold. I mean, on hold makes sense to me. But in order to understand a lot of what Eileen will be showing you later, it's helpful to have this picture in your mind. You have, right now we just have a job, and people get hired into the job. And at that moment, we have a real expense. I mean, we have other kinds of tracking systems to show for the state, for example, how many FTE we have.
No, they don't look at that report.
That's
Don't
right, thank
say
you.
that.
We have other ways to do that. But when we try to ask some of those questions that were on the earlier slide, we can't. Because at any given day, the number of people we have on campus in the FTE level is different. With position, you say, we have a position. And when you add a person to it, or an employee, a non-hollowed out, non-frozen human being, corporeal, in the corporeal world, you create a job, which is the unique union of a position and a person. And this condition says that a job cannot exist without a position and a person, and a position can exist without a job or a person, and that is a vacancy, and it has a dollar value. And how you decide what that dollar value is when you're trying to do planning or risk profiling for your model, totally up to the business process. This is just a way of calculating our compensation expense in our tool. You have a position. It has to be active. So we could have unactive positions, but we don't care about those because for some reason they got shut off and we really don't want to be thinking about them from a budgetary perspective. The position has an employee or not. If it has an employee, we call that an incumbent. They have to be active and they have to have an FTE. Once you've calculated the salary and the FTE, you get a dollar amount for that unique combination, which you then distribute. And in a beautiful, simple world, you have 100% distribution of that FTE that across just one costing string. But we don't live in that world. And together you find out that you've got sort of a compensation expense that lives at the costing string, the department ID. It's so simple, isn't it? So let me blow your mind. And this is important to understand when you're trying to put together a budget tool that has this information in it. So for a unique combination of a department ID, so this is your lowest level, whatever their place is, the position and the employee combination, so somebody's in it, their appointment status needs to be active, otherwise why would we consider it? They have to have some kind of an FTE. Are they 40% time, 30% time? Are they 50% time against this unique combination? And the FTE can change, and it has effective dating on it when you do it. So from this point to this point, this person was a full FTE. Then they decided, you know, I am going to spend more time with my family. Not that that occurs to me. And from this period until the future, I'm going to be 0.75. Now let's get to the job costing piece of it, right? Different. For this period of time, I'm going to be charged a chart string A, 25%. And for this period of time, I'm going to be on chart string B at 75% time. Then we get here, when B ends, we're on D now. And for D, we'll be at 75%. But oh, look at this. This 25% ended, and now we have chart string C. And all of this has to total 100%. Otherwise, you're going to miss some of the dollars, right? So then you calculate the salary cost for the month. And you can see on a month-to-month basis, you have this much money on chart string A, and you have this much money on chart string B for this month. This month is a different story. But in order to get the annual total that goes into your budget, you have to summarize all these months. And this is something that planning does automatically. But you need to understand what it's doing, because if any break in any of this happens, you're going to miscalculate your expense. Now let's go to HCM, our HCM, or PPS, for example. The data, though we would wish it to be, isn't perfect. And so my cautionary tale, which we will share when we talk about this, is just that the data cleansing piece of this is huge. And getting the data in and right is huge. And the change management for people who are actually learning this for the very first time is huge. And so a lot of the feedback that we got during our initial implementation was just like, you are blowing my mind. When Laurent saw this slide in the presentation, he said, this makes my brain hurt. So with your brain hurting, let's take a break.